I'm sorry, but that sounds like separation, not unity. The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. 26 pairs of eyes turned toward the corner of the conference room, where Emily Dawson stood frozen, her cleaning cloth still in her trembling hand. Something was wrong in the gleaming cathedral of Phoenix Tech's 38th floor conference room. Not with the mahogany table that could seat 20 or the floor-to-ceiling windows framing San Francisco Bay like a corporate painting. The wrongness lived in the spaces between people, in the way conversations stopped when Emily entered, in the careful avoidance of eye contact, in the practiced choreography of pretending she didn't exist. Emily moved through the room like a ghost in gray uniform, her cleaning cart wheels whisper soft against marble floors. For 3 years, she'd perfected this invisibility. Shoulders slightly curved, inward eyes, downcast movements, efficient and soundless. The art of taking up no space while occupying the same room as people who mattered. But ghosts see everything. She'd watched Alexander Reed practice this presentation 17 times. 17 times she'd bitten her tongue, her hands tightening on her cleaning cloth, as his Mandarin pronunciation carved dangerous meanings into hopeful words. Each repetition was like watching someone unknowingly step toward a cliff, while she remained powerless to warn them. The executives around the table wore the particular tension of people betting everything on tomorrow's meeting. Their body language spoke volumes. Lauryn Hill's white-knuckled grip on her portfolio, the way Alexander's jaw tightened when he stumbled over tones, the collective held breath that meant millions of dollars hung in the balance. And Emily arranging papers that didn't need arranging, pretending not to understand the language that flowed through her dreams. Separation and unity. Alexander's voice carried authority, but Emily's trained ear caught the fatal flaw in his Mandarin pronunciation. The tones were wrong, catastrophically wrong. She tried to focus on wiping the same spot on the whiteboard for the 3rd time, but the words kept echoing separation instead of unity. Disaster disguised as welcome. "That's our opening," Alexander announced to his team. "We'll lead with cultural respect, show them we've done our homework." Emily's cleaning cloth stilled. Her grandmother's voice whispered from memory. "Sometimes staying silent is not kindness, little flower. Sometimes it is cruelty." She opened her mouth, then caught Lauryn Hill's razor-sharp gaze cutting across the room. Lauren's expression said everything. "You don't belong here. You don't speak here. You don't matter here." Emily's mouth closed. But as Alexander began practicing the phrase again in broken Mandarin, something shifted in the room's energy. Frankie Coleman, the security guard, had appeared in the doorway for his routine check. His weathered eyes found Emily's face, then followed her gaze to Alexander. For a moment, understanding passed between them, the recognition of two people who worked in the margins, watching disasters unfold in real time. Frankie's slight nod was barely perceptible, but to Emily, it felt like permission. "I'm sorry," Emily whispered, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "But that sounds like separation, not unity." And in that moment, as 26 pairs of eyes turned toward her, Emily Dawson stepped out of 3 years of carefully maintained invisibility and into a light that would change everything. 20 minutes later, Emily sat across from Dr. Margaret Chen, Phoenix Tech's senior Mandarin translator, in a sterile conference room that smelled of coffee and corporate anxiety. Dr. Chen's kind eyes crinkled as she listened to Emily repeat the disputed phrase, her pronunciation flowing like water over stones. "Remarkable," Dr. Chen murmured, then turned to Alexander. "She's absolutely correct, and her accent suggests she's familiar with Beijing dialect specifically, which given tomorrow's meeting is precisely what we need." Lauren's manicured fingers drummed against the table like rain on glass. "This is absurd. She's a janitor. Since when do we consult cleaning staff on international business?" Emily felt heat creep up her neck. The familiar sensation of shrinking, of trying to fold herself small enough to disappear. She'd perfected this art in elementary school, when other children's laughter had taught her that speaking up only brought pain. But Alexander leaned forward, his granite features softening imperceptibly. "Where did you learn Mandarin?" The question hit Emily like unexpected sunlight. No one had ever asked about her learning before, only her cleaning schedule, her efficiency ratings, her ability to remain unseen. "Books mostly," she said, her voice gaining strength. "There's a library branch near my apartment and online videos. I practice during lunch breaks in the supply closet." She paused, then added with a ghost of pride, 3 years now. "Why?" Alexander's question was simple, but Emily heard layers beneath it. Emily touched the small jade bracelet on her wrist, her grandmother's last gift before dementia stole her words. "My grandmother always said languages are bridges, and I thought, maybe someday I'd need to build one. I was always the shy girl who listened instead of speaking, but listening taught me that words carry more than meaning, they carry hearts." Lauren's laugh was sharp as breaking crystal. "How convenient. Right before our most important Chinese partnership meeting, our janitor suddenly reveals secret linguistic talents." Her voice dripped skepticism. "Forgive me if I find the timing suspicious." Emily's cheeks burned. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I can go back to—" "No." Alexander's voice cut through her retreat. "Tomorrow's meeting could make or break this company. Our usual translator is in Beijing and the backup just canceled." He studied Emily with the intensity of a jeweler examining a diamond. "Dr. Chen, how long would it take to assess her capabilities properly?" "Give me 2 hours," Dr. Chen replied. As Emily followed Dr. Chen from the room, she caught sight of her reflection in the conference room's black marble wall. The woman staring back looked small, overwhelmed, but for the first time in 3 years, not invisible. The next 2 hours blurred together like a fever dream. Dr. Chen led Emily through conversations about everything from weather to international trade agreements. Emily's mind, trained by thousands of hours of solitary study, responded with growing confidence. "Your vocabulary is extensive," Dr. Chen noted, "but your cultural understanding is what's truly impressive. These aren't just words you've memorized, you understand context, nuance. How is this possible?" Emily hesitated, then opened her phone. The screen showed dozens of video calls, virtual conversations with elderly Chinese immigrants who gathered in online language exchange groups. "I practice with people who want to improve their English. We trade stories about our grandmothers, our dreams. Language isn't just words, it's hearts talking to hearts." Dr. Chen's expression shifted from professional assessment to genuine amazement. "Alexander needs to hear this." But when they returned to find Alexander, Lauren was already there, her voice sharp with authority. "This whole situation is inappropriate and potentially damaging," Lauren was saying. "We cannot risk our most important partnership on the whims of an untrained employee who happened to overhear something. I've already contacted 3 professional translation services." Alexander's jaw tightened. "And their availability? Limited, but they're professionals. Unlike—" Lauren's gaze swept over Emily dismissively. Emily felt the familiar urge to sink into the floor, but Dr. Chen stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of decades in international business. "Alexander, in 30 years of translation work, I've rarely encountered someone with such intuitive grasp of cultural nuance. This isn't luck. It's natural talent refined by dedication." The room fell silent except for the whisper of the air conditioning. Emily could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of unspoken possibilities pressing against her chest. Alexander studied her for a long moment, When he spoke, his voice carried the gravity of a man used to making decisions that moved mountains. Emily, I'm going to ask you something, and I need complete honesty. Do you believe you could handle translation for a multi-million-dollar partnership negotiation? The question hung in the air like a suspended bridge between two cliffs. Emily thought of her grandmother's jade bracelet of 3 years of secret study of all the dreams she'd kept locked in the supply closet with her textbooks. I believe language is about understanding people, she said quietly. And I've been understanding people my whole life, I've just never been allowed to show it. Alexander nodded slowly. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. you'll sit in on our preliminary meeting with the Beijing delegation, not as an observer, as our primary translator. Lauren's face went white. Alexander, this is reckless beyond. My decision is final. His tone brooked no argument. Emily, go home. Rest. Tomorrow changes everything. As Emily gathered her cleaning supplies for what might be the last time she caught sight of Frankie Coleman, the 62-year-old security guard watching from the hallway. His weathered face wore an expression she'd never seen before: pride. Knew there was more to you, kiddo, he said softly as she passed. Sometimes the best treasures are hidden in the deepest minds. That shy girl who used to hide with her books during lunch breaks. She just showed them all what real courage looks like. Walking home through San Francisco's evening fog, Emily felt something stirring in her chest, a sensation she'd almost forgotten. Hope, fragile as spun glass, but real enough to touch. Tomorrow she would step out of the shadows. Tomorrow everything would change. Emily arrived at Phoenix Tech at 7 a.m., 2 hours before the meeting. Her hands shook as she pressed her security badge, the same badge that had granted her access only to supply closets and service elevators for 3 years. Today, it would take her to the executive floor. The elevator ride felt like ascending to another planet. Each floor that passed represented a level of corporate hierarchy she'd only glimpsed through glass doors. By the time she reached the 38th floor, her heart was performing acrobatics. The executive conference room was a cathedral of capitalism, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a breathtaking view of San Francisco Bay, a table that could seat 20, and technology that probably cost more than Emily's annual salary. But it was the preparation that took her breath away. Documents in both English and Mandarin covered every surface. Cultural gift arrangements stood ready for presentation. Someone had even placed small Chinese flags alongside American ones. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a carefully choreographed dance of diplomacy. Early, Alexander's voice came from behind her. He stood in the doorway wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Emily's car. But his expression held something she'd never seen before: vulnerability masked as professional assessment. I wanted to review the materials, Emily said, gesturing to the papers scattered across the table. Mr. Reed, Alexander, he corrected quietly. Today we're colleagues. The word hit Emily like a physical force. Colleagues. Not superior and subordinate, not executive and janitor, but equals sharing a purpose. I've been thinking, Alexander continued, settling into a chair beside her, not across from her, she noticed. 3 years ago, I lost a $50 million partnership because I misunderstood cultural context. My translator was technically perfect, but she missed the emotional subtext. The meeting failed, not because of language, but because of heart. Emily studied his profile as he gazed out at the bay. What happened? I spent 2 years learning Mandarin myself after that, he admitted. But pronunciation, it's not my strength. Yesterday, when you corrected me, I realized something. You didn't just hear wrong words, you heard the potential damage those words could cause. That's not translation, that's wisdom. At 8:30, Dr. Chen arrived with final briefing materials and concerning news. Our backup translator just called, she announced grimly. Flight delayed from Chicago due to weather. He won't arrive until this afternoon. At 8:45, Lauren appeared, her expression tight with barely contained disapproval. At 8:50, Alexander's assistant announced that their guests had arrived early, eager to begin, and at 8:55, Emily's world exploded. Sir, Alexander's assistant's voice carried urgency. Beijing just sent updated materials. Mr. Liu, their primary negotiator, speaks only Mandarin and expects full cultural protocol. They're requesting immediate confirmation that we have native-level translation services. The conference room fell into stunned silence. Emily felt the weight of 20 pairs of eyes settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. Emily. Alexander's voice was steady, but she caught the tremor beneath it. This just became significantly more complex than we planned. Emily closed her eyes, thinking of her grandmother's words. Bridges are built one stone at a time, little flower. But sometimes you must leap across the water to place the first stone. I'm ready, she said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. The Beijing delegation entered like diplomats from another world. 6 impeccably dressed professionals led by a woman in her 50s whose sharp eyes missed nothing. Behind them came an elderly man who radiated authority despite his slight frame, Mr. Liu, the decision-maker upon whom everything depended. Introductions proceeded like a carefully choreographed ballet. Emily found herself in the surreal position of speaking for Alexander Reed, her voice slightly trembling at first, then growing stronger as muscle memory from thousands of practice conversations took over. Every word she'd studied, every late-night session with elderly immigrants, every hour in the supply closet, it all crystallized into this moment. But 15 minutes into the meeting, something unexpected happened. Mr. Liu leaned forward and spoke directly to Emily in rapid Mandarin, not through her to Alexander, but to her as if she were the true negotiator. He's asking about your background. Emily translated to Alexander, then paused. Mr. Liu was still speaking, his eyes locked on hers. He says, Emily's voice caught. He says he can tell from my accent that I learned from the North region speakers. He wants to know if I've spent time in Beijing. Alexander nodded encouragingly. Tell him the truth. Emily turned back to Mr. Liu and spoke in fluent Mandarin that flowed like music. I learned from elderly friends who missed their homeland. They taught me that language carries the heart of a culture, not just its words. Mr. Liu's expression transformed. He smiled, really smiled for the first time since entering the room. He spoke again in animated Mandarin, gesturing enthusiastically. He says, Emily translated, wonder creeping into her voice, that he can hear his grandmother's Beijing accent in my pronunciation. He says it's like listening to home. Lauren shifted uncomfortably. This is highly irregular. We should focus on business matters. But Mr. Liu had already launched into the technical aspects of the partnership, speaking directly to Emily with increasing enthusiasm. Emily found herself not just translating, but facilitating, drawing on 3 years of overheard business conversations to navigate technical terms, asking clarifying questions when concepts didn't translate cleanly, building the bridge her grandmother had always spoken about. An hour in, something remarkable happened. Mr. Liu paused mid-sentence and asked Emily a direct question that made her blood freeze. He's asking, Emily said slowly, about my education, specifically where I studied international business. The room held its breath. Emily looked at Alexander, then at the delegation, then at her own hands, still bearing calluses from 3 years of cleaning work. Tell him the truth, Alexander said quietly. Emily straightened her shoulders and spoke in clear, confident Mandarin. The delegation listened intently, Then Mr. Liu asked another question in Chinese. He wants to know. Emily translated, her voice stronger now. What university trained me to understand cultural nuance so precisely? The truth, Alexander repeated. Emily took a breath that felt like diving into deep water. She spoke in Mandarin for a full minute, her voice growing more confident with each sentence. When she finished, the room was silent enough to hear the fog rolling past the windows. I told them, Emily said, that I'm the janitor who cleans these offices. That I learned Mandarin during my breaks sitting in supply closets because I believed language could build bridges. And that sometimes the best education comes not from classrooms, but from hearts that refuse to stay silent. The silence stretched like pulled wire. Then Mr. Liu began to laugh, a deep, joyful sound that filled the conference room like sunlight. He spoke rapidly to his delegation in Mandarin, who began nodding and smiling. He says, Emily translated, tears beginning to blur her vision, that in China there's an old proverb, the most beautiful jade is often found in the roughest stone. He says Phoenix Tech is wise to recognize hidden treasures. Alexander's expression shifted through amazement, admiration, and something deeper, respect. And Lauren Hill, for the first time in her career, sat speechless watching a woman in a maintenance uniform conduct the most successful international negotiation in Phoenix Tech's history. The partnership agreement was signed at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that would reshape two companies and one life forever. As Mr. Liu pressed his seal into the warm red wax, a traditional touch that Emily had suggested, he looked directly at her and spoke words that would echo in her heart for years to come. He says, Emily translated, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest, that this partnership succeeds not because of business terms, but because of trust. And trust begins with authentic communication. Alexander stood to shake hands with the delegation, but Mr. Liu bypassed him entirely. Instead, he approached Emily and offered a formal bow, the kind reserved for honored colleagues. He's thanking me, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper, for helping two cultures understand each other. As the Beijing delegation prepared to leave, Mr. Liu handed Emily a small package wrapped in silk. Inside was a jade bracelet similar to her grandmother's, but carved with symbols she recognized the Chinese characters for bridge and heart. For the bridge builder, Mr. Liu said in careful English, the only English words he'd spoken all day. After the delegation departed, the conference room felt cavernous and strange. Emily stood beside the massive window watching San Francisco Bay stretch toward infinity, still processing the magnitude of what had occurred. $57 million, Alexander said quietly, joining her at the window. That's the value of the partnership you just secured. Emily turned to face him, searching his expression for clues about what came next. Would she return to her cleaning cart? To the supply closet where she'd hidden her dreams for 3 years? I need to ask you something, Alexander continued, his voice carrying the weight of decision. And I want you to think carefully before answering. Emily nodded, her heart performing gymnastics. We've just entered a partnership that will require regular communication with Beijing. Cultural consultation, translation services that go beyond words to understanding. He paused, studying her face. Would you consider accepting a position as our Director of Cultural Communications? The words hit Emily like a physical force. Director. After 3 years of being invisible, of cleaning around conversations, she wasn't allowed to join. She was being offered a seat at the table. I don't have a degree, she said quietly. You have something better, Alexander replied. You have wisdom earned through dedication. You have cultural intuition that can't be taught in classrooms. and you have the courage to speak truth when it matters most. Emily thought of her grandmother, of late nights in the library, of lunch breaks spent with textbooks hidden behind supply closets. 3 years of preparation for a moment she'd never dared imagine. Yes, she said, the word emerging with crystal clarity. Yes, I accept. Lauren Hill, who had remained silent since the delegation's departure, finally spoke. This is unprecedented, she said, but her tone lacked its earlier edge. Promoting someone from maintenance to executive level based on a single meeting. Based on results, Alexander corrected firmly. Emily didn't just translate today, she built trust between two cultures. That's worth more than any degree. Later that evening, as Emily cleaned out her maintenance locker for the last time, Frankie Coleman appeared beside her, his weathered face wearing the proudest smile she'd ever seen. Knew it all along, kiddo, he said, helping her carry her few personal items. Sometimes the brightest lights shine from the darkest corners. Emily held up her grandmother's jade bracelet alongside Mr. Liu's gift, 2 bridges spanning decades and cultures, both pointing toward the same truth, that worth isn't determined by position, but by the courage to use your gifts when the world needs them most. Thank you, she said to Frankie, for believing in me before I believed in myself. As they walked toward the elevator, the same elevator Emily had taken thousands of times, as an invisible cleaner, Frankie pressed the button for the executive floor instead of the basement. From now on, he said with a wink, you're going up. The elevator doors closed on Emily's old life and opened onto possibilities she'd only dreamed about in supply closets and during stolen lunch breaks. But the greatest transformation wasn't her title or salary. It was the knowledge that she'd found her voice, and the world had finally learned to listen. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new bridges to build between cultures and hearts. But tonight, Emily Dawson, former janitor, new director of cultural communications, stood at her apartment window and whispered a promise to the stars, I'll never let fear silence me again. 1 year later, Emily stood before a packed auditorium at the International Conference on Hidden Potential. The jade bracelets on her wrist caught the stage lights as she adjusted the microphone, looking out at an audience hungry for stories of transformation. A year ago, she began her voice carrying across the silent auditorium. I was invisible. Not because I chose to be, but because society had decided that my uniform mattered more than my mind. In the front row sat Alexander Reed, his face radiating quiet pride. Beside him, Dr. Chen smiled with the satisfaction of a teacher watching her student soar. And in the back corner, partly hidden by shadows but beaming with joy, sat Frankie Coleman, no longer a security guard, but Phoenix Tech's new Director of Employee Development, a position created specifically to identify and nurture hidden talent throughout the company. The most dangerous assumption we make, Emily continued, is that worth can be measured by position. That intelligence correlates with degrees. That potential has an expiration date. Her PowerPoint clicked to a photo of the Beijing partnership signing, showing Emily in her maintenance uniform standing beside world-class executives. The image had become legendary in corporate circles, a symbol of untapped potential hiding in plain sight. In Chinese culture, there's a concept that translates to hidden dragons and crouching tigers, Emily continued. It means that extraordinary people exist everywhere, often in the most unexpected places. The question isn't whether they exist, it's whether we're wise enough to recognize them. Emily's voice grew stronger, carrying the authority of someone who'd earned her place through courage rather than credentials. Phoenix Tech's partnership with Beijing has generated over $200 million in revenue this year. But the real value isn't financial. It's the reminder that transformation is always possible when we choose to see people for who they truly are, not who we assume them to be. The slide changed to show Phoenix Tech's new Hidden Potential Initiative, a program that had identified and promoted 17 employees from non-traditional backgrounds, from maintenance staff who spoke multiple languages to cafeteria workers with engineering degrees earned in other countries. Each of these individuals was already extraordinary, Emily explained. We just had to stop being blind to their brilliance. A hand rose in the audience, a young woman with the nervous energy of someone fighting for courage. Ms. Dawson, what would you say to people who feel invisible in their current roles, who have dreams but don't know how to make them real? Emily smiled, remembering her own desperate lunch breaks in supply closets, surrounded by Mandarin textbooks and impossible dreams. I would say that every expert was once a beginner. Every leader was once invisible. Every bridge builder started by believing that connection was possible, even when the gap seemed too wide to cross. She paused, touching the jade bracelets that had become her signature. But most importantly, I would say this: your current title is not your destiny. Your uniform is not your worth. And your silence is not your strength, your voice is. The applause began slowly, like rain starting on a tin roof, then built to a thunderous ovation that lasted 3 full minutes. But Emily's eyes found the faces that mattered most: the maintenance workers, security guards, and cafeteria staff who had been given special tickets to attend. Their expressions told her everything she needed to know. Hope was contagious. Possibility was spreading. And somewhere in that audience, another invisible person was beginning to believe that their time might be coming too. After the conference, Emily returned to her office on the 38th floor of Phoenix Tech, the same building where she'd once emptied trash cans and cleaned windows. Her title plate read, Director of Cultural Communications and Hidden Potential Development. But the jade bracelets remained her most treasured accessories. Lauren Hill stopped by as Emily was reviewing applications for the Hidden Potential Initiative. The former operations manager had requested a transfer to work directly with Emily's program, a humbling decision that had surprised everyone, especially herself. 12 new applicants today, Lauren reported, setting files on Emily's desk, including a night security guard who speaks 4 languages and a cafeteria worker with a master's degree in international relations. Emily smiled, remembering when Lauren had dismissed her as suspicious and inappropriate. Now they worked together to ensure that no one's potential remained hidden in the shadows. Schedule interviews for all of them, Emily said. And Lauren, thank you for growing, for changing, for proving that transformation is possible for all of us. As the sun set over San Francisco Bay, Emily stood at the same window where she'd once watched the world from behind a maintenance cart. Now she stood as someone who had built bridges across cultures, hierarchies, and assumptions. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother's former caregiver. Watched your speech online. Your grandmother would be so proud. You built the bridge she always believed you could. Emily touched the jade bracelets and whispered words in both English and Mandarin. Some bridges take years to build, but they last forever. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to help hidden potential emerge from unexpected places. But tonight, Emily Dawson, former invisible janitor, current bridge builder between worlds, was exactly where she belonged, visible, valued, and ready to help others find their own light in the darkness.